All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining again this week. This time we're going to talk about sales. Specifically, we're going to really kind of focus on sales objections. Obviously, there's many different types of objections, and we'll touch on a few here, but mainly we're going to focus around price. I've definitely been hearing that price has become more of an issue this year. The supply and demand for landscaping is started to shift a little bit, I would say. Throughout the COVID era, there was more demand than there was contractors. And I think with the economy softening up a little bit, we're seeing that shift back to, I would say, just a normal, really. Off the start here, it'd be great if everybody just throw your name in the and where you're from in the chat. I'm going to prompt you with a few questions along the way, ask you guys to share a little bit of feedback as we go through today's presentation. But just getting started, what we're really going to try to focus on is just how important it is to be able to manage objections once you actually get them, but also kind of get in front of them by creating power questions and power statements that allow you to kind of guide the sales conversation in a little bit more of a sort of expected way, so that you can really, I think, handle the customer's needs in a more sort of confidence building approach. Because I think ultimately, people just buy from people that they know and trust to be the expert in any respective field, particularly us landscapers. Ultimately, they're hiring us to solve a problem, and we need to make sure that they understand that we're the right company to solve that problem at a fair price and really allow them to get what they are looking for or solve the pain that they're looking to solve. So depending on what segment of landscaping you service, could be design build, it could be residential maintenance, commercial maintenance, could be snow plowing. The pain points are very different. Sometimes people are buying to solve a problem. Other people are buying because they want something that they don't have right now. So clearly there's a couple different angles in which, we can take our sales approach, but I'm going to kind of share one that I believe works really well here throughout the day. So we got to take people from a lead or a prospect all the way through to a paying customer. When we first meet them, there's a certain sort of list of things that we need to know and understand. And if we don't have a consistent way of doing that, then I think every customer has a different experience. When we've got different experiences happening every time we meet with customers, we get very different outcomes. And so oftentimes owner operators who start to hire salespeople for the first time really learn this the hard way. Sometimes we don't realize that we're actually pretty good at selling. Owner operators just kind of instinctively sell a little bit better, in the sense that they started a business to solve a pain point, and they honestly just don't realize how good they are at solving that. And so every conversation that they're out having day in, day out is about that need or problem that they're solving with their business. So they get really good at explaining it. But oftentimes when we hire salespeople to come in and start selling, they're not as clear on what those pain points are or how to sort of overcome them. And so I think having a system to really improve the way that other people can have those conversations in your business is key. And that said, I think everybody, owner, operator, or not, can always benefit from a system, from an approach that kind of creates consistency in the way that we do things. So what we want to do here is really, first off, kind of understand who our customers are, understand what their common objections will be long before they even tell us what those objections are, so that we're really prepared, and where possible, we can actually overcome most of the objections with our sales pitch and with our sort of approach to finding out what their needs are. But then we want to kind of get good at developing this list of power questions and power statements to build trust and kind of minimize and overcome the objections that we come up to as we kind of work through the process. So first off, why do objections happen? I think we just have to be realistic. People are spending money and they want to make sure that they're making the right choice before they part with their money. Everybody works hard for their money, whether it's a big business or a homeowner. They want to make sure that they get value, that they solve the problem, or they get exactly what it was that they had signed up for. So generally, objections happen during the sales process because there's still some unanswered questions. Normally, this is kind of the primary cause. I've got all kinds of reasons why I'm not sure I should do business with somebody because they haven't told me yet. And so unanswered questions are kind of number one. So if you're getting a lot of objections, you have to sort of, self-reflect a little bit and come to that realization sooner or later that you're probably not explaining the value and truly explaining what you're selling clearly enough for them to understand enough to sort of put their natural objections to rest. And so we want to understand what those objections are so we get better at it. And then there's fewer and fewer unanswered questions as we go. So number two, the prospect just needs to clarify things. Sometimes you've explained it and explained it clearly, but they can only really absorb the information so quickly. So there's kind of follow-up questions. And so they're not always straight up objections. They could just be, clarifications. And it's important to kind of see the difference between the two and kind of improve and hone your sales pitch so that you can kind of reduce the need for more and more follow-up questions. Sometimes they want a better deal. Sorry, there's a typo there. Sometimes they want a better deal at the end of the day. And this is a pretty common one in our business. Unfortunately, price comes up all the time. We're going to focus on talking about price here today so that we can kind of get better at overcoming this really common one. The need for third-party approval. Anytime you're dealing with commercial clients, often there's approvals needed upstream. Even in residential, more often than not, both parties, the couple, if there is a couple that owns the house, they usually want to talk amongst themselves and kind of come up with a little bit of a mutual agreement, kind of natural. The last one is they just don't want to buy from you. And, sometimes that has actual reasons, and sometimes there's things that we can do better to change that. But in any case, we do kind of want to get to a fast yes from a customer or a fast no. And so I think it's pretty important that while we're sort of selling and explaining our value and really trying to understand their pain points and letting them know how we'd solve them, I think it's really important to also just understand that not everybody's going to buy from you, and that's okay. Getting to that sort of realization sooner is kind of like money in the bank because you're going to move on to somebody else who's actually interested in buying what it is that you have to sell. So those of you that have kind of been to a workshop or an event with me before have probably heard me talk a lot about this concept of pain or pleasure. And I think I first stumbled on this in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think way back in my early 20s reading that book. And it resonated really well. And I kind of look at most things this way. Us humans tend to only move to avoid pain or to find pleasure. And so when we're selling, it's pretty important to understand what their pain points are and what they're seeking in terms of pleasure. So obviously, if we're selling to a commercial car parts plant, the person ordering your service is probably more looking to solve a problem or avoid pain than they are seeking pleasure. They don't really get that excited about the idea of hiring a landscape maintenance contractor or a snow plowing company. But they do need to solve the problem, and it's up to us to understand how to uncover that problem. I think, many, many times we approach these sales conversations not really being focused enough on who the actual buyer persona is. And what I mean by buyer persona is, who is it that's going to make the decision and who am I selling to right now in the moment? Oftentimes there's a decision maker further downstream, but I still have to get the buyer or the person that I'm selling interested enough to make the recommendation to go ahead with me or my company. So there's kind of a sequence of things that starts to unfold really quickly in any sale. I'm going to try to touch on them very quickly in this short presentation. We do have an 8-week sales intensive series coming up as part of our weekly mastermind that's going to kick off in July. And I'll go a little bit deeper into all of these things. And I'd really recommend anybody who's selling or answering the phones or really coming in contact with customers with an opportunity to either sell or expand revenue or resell to your customers, I'd really suggest that they join us for that 8-week series, because we're going to kind of go through this in a little bit more of a step-by-step process. We're moving super fast today. I'm going to try to give you as much as I can, but the reality is there's some stages and some work to be done. One being, I really think it's important that you understand who your customers are, what the buying habits are, what their pain points are, and really what sort of power questions are going to pull those needs out best, and then what power statements you're going to use to really build confidence and move them to the next stage in your sales process. So I'm going to kind of touch on a few here right now of these power questions and power statements, because I think the better that you are at using these, the more likely you are to have fewer issues as the process unfolds. But really, just in that real short time frame, like just in the conversation, the more powerful your statements are to your questions once they give you an answer, I think the less you're going to find that you've got these objections that you end up facing. And I think it's much easier to deal with an objection proactively than to have one kind of coming at you in the future. So ultimately, I'm going to kind of just use this example. This is purely just one example. There'd be so many. I think we all know there's a lot of different customers, lots of different problems. I'm just going to use a commercial property. I'm going to call this a automotive parts manufacturer. So they're supplying parts to the big automotive companies. Now, I'm going in there knowing what their business is. I know that I'm selling to the facilities manager for the property. I know what they do. They sell car parts. The car parts leave a loading dock out back. So that's really important to them. Those car parts have to land at another plant just in time, or it's going to hold up an entire production line. So again, I've done the research, so I know what they do and what they're likely to have for pain points. And I know the buyer persona that I'm dealing with. The facilities manager does not really care how much the snow plowing and landscape maintenance costs. They don't care. It doesn't impact them. Their paycheck is the same either way. They just want a contractor that does it so well that they don't hear complaints from other managers and other people in the building. They just want to know that it's taken care of. That's all they care about. So when I go there to sell, I'm not going to go really heavy on price with this person, but I'm going to find out if price has been a problem in the past. So where I want to go with it right away is I want to just ask 3 power questions. Once I've kind of gotten through building rapport, I've had my, brief about who they are, and I've gotten to know this facilities manager and how long they've worked there and a few basics, and we've talked about the weather. Now I'm getting to the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So I want to say something along the lines of, hey, what are the specific challenges or issues that you've had with other contractors that have had this project in the past? So I want to say this very confidently. I want to get them to tell me what I need to know in order to decide what power statement I'm going to drop on them to make sure that they know that we can confidently solve this problem for them. So once I've asked the question, the next thing is I get the information that I'm looking for, the information that I need to know to avoid more objections in the future. So I want to hear they were inconsistent. This other contractor had really poor attention to detail. They weren't really communicating very well. Their billing wasn't very clear. We think we were even getting billed for visits when they weren't here. The loading docks weren't clear during storms. They had lots of equipment breakdowns, and their problems became our problems. And ultimately, they just didn't really perform the way we expected. I was getting lots of complaints as the facility manager. I don't know. I've had enough of them. I'm ready to try somebody else. And so once I know that information, it allows me to drop a power statement. So I'm going to drop something heavy that's going to convince them that we are different than the situation they've had. And then I'll move on to another power question. I like to try to get 2 to 3, sometimes more if I don't feel like I've got the momentum. But ultimately, these questions are building momentum in the conversation. So my next question here after finding this out, my power statement here after finding this out is going to be all about the company. I'm going to give them some education. Well, actually, that's great to understand because we use a system that allows us to track everything in real time. We really believe that service verification is the key to customer satisfaction. So we know that we're good at plowing snow and cutting grass and mulching your gardens and making your property safe and functional. We're very confident that we're good at doing that because we've got certified trades on staff. All of our staff go through a really robust training program. They've got an app that tells them where they need to be, when they need to be there, what they need, and what they're going to do while they're there. And that app tracks everything. And it even puts that into a portal so that you can check in anytime and see what we did and where we did it and why. Because we really believe that we should operate in a transparent way. We want to say what we do and do what we say. And so we just use one system to manage our staff and provide service verification to our customers. And so I hit them with the power statement. Then I'm going to move on to my next one. Now I'm going to go straight into another power question, which is going to be like, hey, how do well-maintained grounds impact your business operation? And then they're going to tell me what I need to know in order to sell them. So in this case, they're telling me, hey, those loading docks, they have to be clear 24/7. No matter what, we need those loading docks clear because there's trucks coming and going for just-in-time delivery. I already knew that because I researched them, but I just want them to say it so that we can have a conversation about it. Next up, well, what about, staff parking out front, 7 a.m.? Okay, I got to have those lots clear before the boss gets there. No problem. Lots of customer meetings at this facility. Image is super important. The owner is really concerned about the brand. And we've got a pretty strong safety and compliance plan around here because we're an ISO company, being a parts manufacturer. Again, I know all of this because I did the research. I'm just getting them to tell me by asking these questions. So I have the conversation. I get that information. Now I come back out and drop the power statement, letting them know just how we manage these problems. We don't have any issue providing a 24/7 service. Our crews are on standby. We use a weather alert system to let us know. Every time the crew comes to your property, you're going to have real-time service verification. When we clock in and out of your property, it shows real-time weather from the local Google weather station. Our billing shows what time we were there, what time we left, what we did. It shows the notes. We can take before and after pictures if you like. All of this will just be sitting right there in your customer portal. And that way, you know exactly what happened, and you've got service verification for your ISO compliance. And we even update exactly how much de-icing we put down each time so that any of your environmental tracking projects are accurate as well. And so again, I've got my power statement that matches up with their concerns or their pain points from the past. All I'm doing here is I'm trying to unearth the objections before they tell me the objections. I don't want to give someone a price and then have them come back to me with 10 objections. I want to solve them before I give them a price so that they can see the value and so that I'm building confidence specific to their pain points or their needs. So my last big power question here would be, what's the criteria that you're going to use to select your next contractor. I just want to be clear on exactly what it's going to take to get the job. And I also want to know exactly what that criteria is so that I can service you the way that you really want to be serviced long term. Because, we don't really look for contracts for 1 year, 2 year, 3. We're looking for 10-year relationships. Like, we're in business for the long haul. I want to understand what it's going to take to really get the job and make you happy forever so that we can really take this relationship to the point that it needs to for both of us. I think we both need to solve this problem. And if we do it well together, then we don't have this problem to deal with again in the future. So again, they're letting me know exactly what is important to them. They're telling me now capability is everything. We need a reliable company with new equipment who shows up no matter what. We can't let our loading docks ever get clogged up. We need our place to look top notch every day of the year. And ultimately, we just really want somebody that we can trust. And so now back to the power statement, I go back into telling them exactly why we're trusted, exactly what makes us show up on time, the fact that we've got a deep training program to make sure that our staff know what they're doing and they know when to do it and how to do it. And we've got a technology platform that powers our entire company to make sure that everybody understands exactly where they need to be and when they need to be there. And then we also track everything using that app so that our customers can verify exactly what we did in real time as well. And so when I get really good at doing this, what happens is I think the price objections start to shrink rapidly. And, ultimately I get down to a small list of objections. And so I thought I'd just put a list of common price objections up just for conversation here. But I wanted to kind of ask everybody and throw this in the chat. How often are you actually getting pricing objections right now? Is this every deal, most deals, 80% of the time, 50% of the time? How often does price really become the primary objection when you're selling? If you don't mind throwing that in the chat, that'd be great. My experience here is that it's pretty common. And what I'll say is if you're finding it's like a 30% or 50% of the time, that's too much. I think what you have to do is find some techniques to really unearth the need as early as possible and really address it a little bit stronger. You should sort of see price come up, very loosely in conversation, but it shouldn't become an outright objection unless, maybe you haven't quite reinforced the value, which again, I think is a result often of not having really good power questions and really good power statements. So that's an opportunity. If you're finding it's happening a lot, like it's happening 30 to 50% of the time, then I would definitely really look at your sales pitch. And we're going to work on that over, as I said, 8 weeks of these weekly sessions through July and August. We're going to hyper focus on sales process. Okay, so common objections, I won't read everyone, but your price is too high compared to the other quotes. I can't afford it. There's too many extra charges. This is common with recurring maintenance work. You're charging me for all these other things that you're doing. I wasn't expecting that. People looking for discounts. I didn't expect it to cost this much. That one's really common with design build quotes. I'm not seeing the value for this price. It just seems like it's really expensive for what it is. I'd like to do business with you, but the other guy's cheaper, these type of comments. Ultimately, I think if you have a power statement kind of prepared for every one of these common price objections or other common objections that you might have, I think you really set yourself up for a much better conversion rate, which, I always say that sales is more about quality than quantity. I would much rather go meet with a handful of prospects each week and have an extremely high close rate than just be lobbing bids. And I think most people see it that way. Unfortunately, I think as landscapers, we get really good at doing landscaping, and that takes a lot of practice and a lot of years of effort. And if we say the 10,000 hour rule is in effect, yeah, it kind of takes you 5 years to get really good at doing landscaping. And then you start a landscape business, but it takes 5 more years to get really good at sales. Most landscapers don't really take the time to really focus on their sales process. And often there's just a few little steps that are missing from being kind of a rookie or being a true sales professional. And just like a backyard homeowner landscaper on the weekend, a do-it-yourselfer, if you will, they miss quite a few key steps in the process of building a patio or planting trees or building a deck or a fence. They just don't get it right. Let's be honest. Very few are experts at doing those tasks. And even though it takes them a little longer, they usually still don't get it right. So what I'm saying here is sales is the same. Ultimately, just because you're a great landscaper doesn't mean you're great at selling landscaping. So it's going to take a little bit of work. And it does take a process. One of those key things, in my opinion, is identifying what the objections are likely to be, how to overcome them, and then sort of doing a little bit of practice. And so what these objections that we just looked at really mean are kind of different than what they are on the surface. You know, they don't have the money for the job. That's a real objection. Once you figure that out, it's time to move on. That happens quite a bit. People want a $200,000 backyard for $40,000. And when you show them what $40,000 will spend, they don't want it. And that's okay. We just need to move on faster. They have the money, but they won't spend it. There's just a lack of perceived value. They're not ready to part with their money to solve that problem or get that thing that they want. Can't make decisions on their own because they don't have the authority to do that on their own. They think there's a better deal out there, so they want to keep shopping around. They want to deal with another company, maybe someone they're more familiar with or somebody the neighbor used. They don't really want to change vendors. You know, sometimes when you go to meet with these facility people in commercial properties, they're not actually ready to change vendors. Just somebody in purchasing told them to go get some new pricing. And so in that case, it's really hard to get buy-in on the fact that you're better, but they, again, don't care about the price. That's just somebody in accounting or finance telling them to go get some more pricing. So they're not that interested in anything you have to say because there's really no problem. There's nothing in it for them. And so you got to be aware of that because many, many times you're going to come up against that. And so you have to find a way to create desire even in those situations where there might not be much to begin with. Too busy with other things that are just, they just think you're priced too high. No matter what you say, you're priced too high. Those people exist everywhere at the end of the day. And when we find somebody who's like that, again, it's time to move on at a certain point. We can only convince them of value if they actually have more pain than have more money than they wish to have the pain. And so everybody has got to exchange money to solve a problem at some point. And if the problem doesn't feel big enough to exchange that amount of money, people will not buy. And it's kind of simple when you think of it that way. One thing that I've found really helps, though, is just focusing back on the value. Once they start to give me this information, I want to bring them back to value and keep selling value. I think this is often where many people take a wrong turn. They start negotiating based on what the other guy charges instead of what value you are bringing to the table with your company. You have to sell value if you want to overcome price. So there's techniques to this. We'll go much deeper into this conversation in our summer series. I'm going to try to cover a few here and then take a few questions so that we stay on time today. How to handle objections. I'm going to rip through this really quickly. I could spend a half an hour on each of these steps, but listen carefully and be focused. Make sure you know what the objection is. When they bring an objection to you, you have to fully understand it before you start to overcome it. I think all too often, Salespeople are trying to overcome objections that aren't even there, or they're trying to talk through things that aren't even a big enough concern for that prospect to not buy. But they miss the one thing that the prospect is most concerned with because they don't listen carefully enough. So I think that's obviously got to be number one. We got to understand what their problem is before we try to solve it. Number two, qualify that the objection that they first tell you is the only one. And again, the way that we do this is when somebody tells us what their concern is and we immediately just dive into that one, sometimes we might kind of miss the mark. I think it's better to ask a series of power questions before really iterating too deeply upon one objection, because we might be able to capture a few in one. And so I think it's good to keep the questions rolling until you're completely clear on what all of those objections include. Brian, always got good questions from Brian. What's your best approach to get your initial contact to help advocate for you to the final decision maker? Oftentimes, I get bid against other companies, which is fine, and I'm not able to sell the decision maker. Sometimes that's because they're kind of moved from the process at some point. It's a great question, Brian. Nothing more frustrating than not getting to the decision maker. So oftentimes in that initial conversation, asking who is going to make the final decision and asking right then in your initial conversation if it's possible for you to present your proposal to the person you're dealing with and the decision makers. And that could be a board if it's an HOA, or it could be an internal team, like in purchasing in a commercial setting. Could be many different scenarios. But I think just asking, would it be okay if I could present my proposal and explain my proposal in detail to those making the decision when the time comes? Either in person or over a quick Zoom call would be fine. I just want to make sure that I get an opportunity to explain exactly what my offer includes firsthand. And I think it's just really asking. But, you're not going to get a yes on that every time, unfortunately. And I do see what the concern is. It's super frustrating when you miss one and you don't get the opportunity to actually speak to the decision maker, and somebody tells you, well, they decided to go with somebody else. And you just kind of cringe hearing they decided because you weren't involved in that process. Jamie's asking, what about getting price checked? Yeah, unfortunate, but it's kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said you show up and the person that you're selling clearly does not want to change vendors. They're happy with the person they've had there for 10 years. And no matter what you say, they're happy. The reality is yeah, they're price checking you. My experience with being that contractor who is kind of coming in, trying to upend somebody who they're happy with is never good. It's when you identify that, I wouldn't say run the other way, but I would say, keep it to a minimum. I would really explain your value, really explain what makes you different. I would go really, really deep into selling the fact that you're tech enabled, that you've got a customer portal, that you've got service verification with pre and post pictures, like really, really sell the tech enablement piece, because there's a strong chance your competitor's not doing that. And so that in itself really kind of changes the conversation. I think that's one thing that I would work on. And then what I would always try to do is figure out how they pay for their services right now so that I can present an option that appears to be more fair, in the sense that they're paying for what they get. There's more value. They see what they're paying for. And we can really kind of secure the business based around a different pricing model than they're currently paying. And they'll see more value in that. And so pricing and packaging is a key component of pricing. And so if you can kind of upend them using a different packaging model, oftentimes the bean counter in the back who's actually making the decision will just like your proposal better. And if you did a good job at explaining how you perform and all of your technology and everything that you've got supporting it during that sales call, I think you have a chance, because if you convinced the person, the feet on the ground, the person that runs the facility, that you're very good at what you do, and if you've sold the people in the back office on a different way of doing business, I think you stand a good chance at upending a good relationship. So I always believe that you should sort of stay with it, but just know that it's a tough crawl. And I think most of us know that anyway. Third, confirm that objection again. Just make sure that that objection that you've heard is the way it is. And so oftentimes, like, allow yourself to slow down in the conversation. Once you've heard what their objection is and you've confirmed that that's kind of it, now you can kind of read it back to them. This is like, okay, I think I understand what you're saying. In other words, you just want to make sure that this, and this are taken care of. Those are your primary concerns. Am I right? And just kind of have that back and forth. This is showing them that you actually care, that you understand what the problem is. And then you can kind of move on, I think, with a way of sort of really setting yourself up to close. And what I mean by this is, I've now confirmed everything that is of importance. I've taken on all of their objections. Now I can kind of wrap up with something that's really strong to kind of close them using everything they've told me. Now I'm just kind of taking everything and I'm wrapping it into a solution that I'm really confident in. I can tell them exactly how I'm going to solve the problem, how we're going to treat them fairly on pricing, how we're really going to kind of add value where others can't, and really make sure that they see exactly what the future holds. Doing business with us is different because of all of these things. Life gets better when you deal with us, because we want to make sure that they can see the future state as I start to really kind of roll closer to that final close. So I'm painting a picture using what they've told me. Now what I want to do is I want to really kind of just make sure that they bring me a yes. And so what I need is I let them know what the solution is, and then I kind of pull it back around to a bit of a question. If we provided you with a portal that showed you exactly what time we started and finished, would that make your life easier on the morning of a big snow event? Yes. Perfect. Okay, great. We actually put site maps right there in the phone so that every time the crew comes to plow the snow, they know exactly where to pile the snow, where to start, what areas are priority, what time things need to be finished for. That way, regardless of who shows up here to plow snow, we're always going to make sure that your primary areas are taken care of in advance of a problem ever happening. And so I'm just trying to get them to acknowledge, and I'm saying, do you know if your last contractor had that kind of capability? Now maybe I might even get a no. A no might not be a bad thing. It's another yes in my mind. I'm building momentum. So I want to kind of tell them my solution, and I want them to really start to agree and help me sell them. Now, I got to get to the end. I got to close, which a close may not always be a signed contract. A close could just be the next stage. And that close might be them saying, yeah, I'd love to have a proposal. I'd love to get a quote from you to take care of the property. This sounds like something that would really meet our needs. I'd love to see that pricing. That is a close of the stage, right? And so we're always looking to close the next stage. So here what I'm saying is asking them a question that will really, truly move it along. So if this was a design build job, I might say something like, hey, if I could get this job started in 3 weeks from now, would you be interested in securing that date? I've got this date available. I know it's not going to last very long. After that, we might not be able to start for about 8 weeks. But do you think that we could possibly really, move this along to the point where we could start in 3 weeks? Now, you kind of know that there's nothing they want more than to start the project right away. So your question actually drives the momentum to really close the deal. And so if I could, would you do this? That's a big one. I'm pretty sure I can do this. It's a little out of the ordinary, but let me check with my boss real quick. I can shoot him a text or I can call him real quick. And if he says yes, do you think I could, count on you for this deal? I don't want to call him if you're not really at that point. We've probably all experienced this one at the car dealership. It's like night and day every single time they go to the manager to get an approval. That's just their playbook. And I think it works really well in certain landscape sales as well. Brian, it looks like you got me another one here. What's the biggest difference between an owner selling and hiring your first salesperson? You said sometimes they struggle to be as effective in any particular reason. Why? Passion, bridge, transition. The reason that they suffer is because we don't train them. Quite honestly, this is a problem in every business. I struggle with this to this very day. It's very hard for us to take the time to step out of what we do day to day and actually spend time identifying customer personas and pain points and objection handling and power statements and power questions. And we make the mistake of assuming that our hired salespeople somehow know this instinctively. And it's just not instinctive. I think there's just a lot of hours and a lot of effort that go into learning that. Most owner operators kind of learn it through osmosis by doing the work and hearing others sell over the years, or getting out there and just getting out of their comfort zone and selling themselves. But the truth is like, we can't expect to just hire somebody and have them understand all of the pain points and all of the power statements and power questions and closing tactics that the owner operators developed over the years. So even the most passionate sales professional can't show up and know all of that. So that's why I think it's so important to build a sales process, because that becomes the foundation for training. When you've got a sales process, you can train others to use it. And so over the 8 weeks throughout the summer months, we're going to build a sales process week by week by week. And if you actually do the homework, I think at the end of 8 weeks, you will have a world-class sales process for landscaping for sure. I know myself, I was able to sell tens and tens of millions of dollars of landscape work a year on my own. I was supported by estimators and designers, but on my own, tens of millions of dollars in sales, just because I had a process and I used the process every single time. That process is in the LMN forms library. You can access it there. All the detail that kind of goes in between that process, we're going to work on throughout July and August as a group. And we're going to kind of continue to upload some new things to the forms library for you to use along the way. So next up, this closing question. Once I kind of get that closing question, I've got all the momentum that I need to kind of step into the final close. And again, the close could just be moving them to the next stage. But ultimately, I want to ask these kind of final questions. We want to get the schedule down. We want to have some statement like, our design process takes 4 to 6 weeks. We have install dates available starting July 1st or July 15th. If you'd like to secure one of those dates, I can give you a secured date if you sign up for your design contract. We'll hold the date for you up until the design is finished. At that point, you're going to have to make a decision. If you don't take the date, we'll fill it in with another project that's on the design board. And so like, we've got these systems that we rely on, or these power statements that we rely on every single time. And when you get good at saying them at the right time and in the right order, you get really good outcomes, really expected outcomes. If it's recurring maintenance, it could be something like, hey, we've got a space in this neighborhood on Tuesdays right now. We've got limited space available, but I'm pretty sure I could squeeze you in on the list next Tuesday. Does that work for you? And there again, I'm just moving to the close. I'm getting the next step made very clear, and I'm asking for the business. We can provide a dedicated crew on Thursday mornings for your property. How does that sound? Would that work for you? I think I could get you started next week. But I want to be as really confident in what step is next, because they're counting on me. And so this is me asking for the business without necessarily, making it uncomfortable. Brian, what's your wildest sales story? Someone offering a big contract or a big deposit check? Anything that stretched you or blew your mind? I had a customer once. I came in with my quote. It was $1.2 million for a landscape renovation on a huge house renovation project that was just wrapping up. It was 1.2, 1.3 million. The owner, he literally put his finger at the top of the quote and went right to the bottom. And he looked up at me. He goes, looks good. You're hired. So that was my wildest story ever. He didn't ask a single question. It was a referral from a good friend. That one was pretty cool. I think what happened next was probably most amazing. We asked for a deposit, and the deposit was, I think, $50,000. And for some reason, his wife wrote us a check for $500,000 as the deposit. I think that was probably the coolest part of that one, was getting a $500,000 check before we started the job. When I offered to give it back, they said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. We'll catch up later." That was probably one of my funnier stories. Now, what next? A couple things that I'd really strongly recommend. One of my favorite all-time sales book, The Sales Bible by Jeffrey Gitomer. It's a book that's been around for a long time. It's even been rewritten. Read it, study it, get to know it. This book is a game changer for you and your sales team. It will give you a lot of good background for the stuff that we're going to talk about throughout July and August. I would make it assigned reading for sure in your company. If you're going to attend that training, I think it'll make a lot of sense and really help kind of guide you in between the sessions. Couple key things to do: understand who you're selling to by creating buyer personas. Really understand what their pain points are. I think crafting an elevator pitch, some opening questions, some power questions and power statements, and a strong list of objections really kind of gives you all of the information that you need to really help your staff understand your customers and how to sell to them by solving their actual problems and really understanding how to speak to those. Once you've got all that in place, I think you've got a system, and then you can start to practice and role play and really try to build more value by practicing how to close or how to move people from stage to stage. Next, I'll take a couple questions. We're almost out of time here. I think we are out of time. But next week, we're going to cover creating your ideal customer profile. Again, this is a big component of building customer personas. This is something we'll talk a lot more about throughout the 8-week session. As always, thanks for joining. And you can follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram if you'd like to see some daily content. I'll take some more questions. I tried to answer them as we went. I'll just scan back here, make sure I didn't miss any. Jamie, what's your advice when you find in the sales process that you're not just getting price checked and the client isn't necessarily looking for a change? Commercial clients and HOAs. I think I did cover that one actually earlier. Sorry, I was rereading. What are some of the best qualifying questions to ask when first talking to a customer? Very, very early in the conversation, I think what you're trying to do immediately is find out where they are, make sure they're in your service area, what they're looking for, just very high level scope. They're looking for landscape maintenance, or they're looking for a swimming pool, or they're looking for to have a soccer field resodded. I mean, there's just such a huge variance to the inbound phone calls that we all receive. We just want to know where they are and what they're looking for, and ideally when they're looking to have that done. I think that kind of just gives us the basics to sort of understand what questions to start asking, just to kind of understand what their needs are immediately, so that we can decide if they're actually worth pursuing in terms of like an on-site meeting over at their home or their property. And so I think we just want to kind of get those basics out. And again, where are they? What is the general scope of work that they're looking for, and when do they want to have that work done? I think that kind of gives us the absolute basics. I don't think we have any questions, and I think we're out of time. Love the fact that everybody makes the time to come out here despite being so busy this time of year. So thank you for that. Really excited about what we're going to deliver in July and August. It's going to be a really in-depth sales process project. I think if you're going to join, be prepared to do a little homework week to week, but I think you're going to come away with a sales process that will allow your business to scale to whatever size you want. In my experience, the two things that you need to focus on are selling better and building better employees. We're going to go deep for 8 weeks on how to sell better to get better revenue, better customers. And then we're going to take a little bit of time this fall to focus on in-depth development techniques for your staff. So we're just kind of doing some intensives, you could say. But thanks again for joining, and we'll see you again next week.